You know that moment when a colleague pops their head round your door and says, "Can you have a quick look at this for me?" Or perhaps a trainee messages you and says, "Sorry to bother you, but can I run something past you?" You're not on duty, you're not their trainer, but you end up reviewing the patient anyway, writing the referral and then following up when the trainee moves on. Or maybe someone just says, "You're really good at this stuff, please can you help me with it?" And before you've even thought about it, you've said yes. I remember when I was working as a GP, often on my way out the door, the receptionist would say, "Rachel, can you just sign this prescription? The patient needs it now." And I'd look at it and it'd be a drug I'd never heard of. So I'd have to stop, go and look it up on the computer. Then I'd realise that it needed to be monitored, wanted to make sure the patient had the right blood test. And before I knew it, 15 minutes had gone and I'm late getting home. Now, sometimes this is all fine, but other times you end up thinking, hang on, when did this become my responsibility?
This is a You Are Not a Frog quick dip, a tiny taster of the kinds of things we talk about on our full podcast episodes. I've chosen today's topic to give you a helpful boost in the time it takes to have a cup of tea.
In the last episode of this mini quick dip series, we talked about the first way in which responsibility lands on you. That's when nobody volunteers and you're sitting in discomfort in what my colleague Dr. Sarah Coop calls the silence gap. And it's so uncomfortable, you just end up volunteering or just taking it on. But there's a second way that responsibility lands almost unconsciously, and that's when someone asks you directly. And in this episode, we're going to be looking at that second type, the moment when a request triggers what I call our helping reflex. Now, in professions that care deeply about the service they're delivering, about their patients, we tend to believe something very, very strongly. If somebody asks you for help, the kind thing to do, the right thing to do, is to say yes. After all, we're trained to help, and that is our job. And we've literally been trained to solve problems, step in when things need doing, to fix things. We like to support colleagues, and many, many of us have built our identities around being exactly that person who's being reliable and capable, who is a really safe pair of hands. So when someone asks us for help, it doesn't really feel like a request, and it doesn't really feel like a choice for us. It feels like a responsibility landing on us. And not just a responsibility, it feels like a duty. The other day, a colleague in my team asked if I could just have a quick look at something before it went out. And of course, I said yes. 15 minutes later, I'm deep in the weeds, rewriting the whole thing. And later that evening, I remember thinking, well, hang on, how did that become my responsibility? And nobody asked me to do it. They didn't even want me to rewrite it. They just asked me for a quick check and for some help. But have you ever had that happen? The responsibility has just landed on you through a request. And as soon as somebody requests it, we feel responsible, and then we can't let it go. And this makes total sense. Of course it does. We are trained to notice problems, fix them, and if something needs sorting, we sort it. If somebody needs help, we help. And that instinct, it saves lives. But it also means that when somebody asks for help, we don't pause to think about the request. And we certainly don't ever think we've got the option of saying no. Even if we know it's not actually our task, we often don't call it out. We continue, but secretly we feel very resentful. I was working with a bunch of GP partners the other day, and they were talking about the fact that even though each one of them had their specific responsibility within the practice, like being the HR partner or the finance partner, if someone stopped them and asked them about something outside of their remit, they didn't feel they couldn't get involved. They didn't feel they could say no, because what would it have said about them? But they felt really annoyed with the fact that they were having to do this task, to listen to that person when it actually wasn't their remit. Because we just respond automatically. And I think of this a little bit like this. So just think of it a little bit like a post box. In the UK, we have bright red post boxes. We have the Royal Mail. And the Royal Mail has a duty to deliver anything that goes into a post box with the correct address and the correct stamp on it. The post box is always open. It will accept whatever comes through. So for us, we accept anything that lands on us. It feels like our professional duty because of the way we've been trained, or shall I say the way we've been groomed or programmed. Saying no doesn't even feel like an option. And so this is where things can become really uncomfortable, because sometimes somebody asks for help and you can't help them, not because you don't care, not because you're being difficult, but because you simply don't have the capacity. Your clinic's full, your to-do list is already off the scale and your own work isn't finished. So you could possibly help them if you had like 26 hours in a day, but you don't. Even though you know you're at capacity, when somebody asks, saying no can feel incredibly hard because when your identity is built around being helpful, saying no doesn't just feel like declining a request. It can feel like shirking responsibility or a complete abdication of your professional duty, letting somebody down, not being the sort of doctor, the sort of nurse, the sort of leader that you believe that you should be. So the requests just land. You take it on before your brain's actually caught up. You've already said yes, and then perhaps you're driving home later in the day, exhausted, still thinking about that thing you said yes to and feeling really resentful that it landed on you. And then feeling guilty for even feeling resentful. That is the bind. This is the situation we find ourselves in. And then we go on to make another common mistake that loads of us make without even realising it. We don't just help a little bit, we end up taking over. It often starts with something really small. So somebody's saying, can you just take a look at this? And then it becomes, can you help me sort this out a bit? And before long, you're the one that's fixing it and finishing it and owning the whole thing. And the responsibility has shifted from them and on to you. I've heard this being described in the past as somebody's passing their naughty monkeys onto you and you are left carrying them. And we've done a whole episode about naughty monkeys. We'll put the link in the show notes if you want to listen to that one. The thing is, because you're capable and conscientious, these naughty monkeys, these things from other people often just stick to you. And then the next time something similar comes up, guess who people ask to do it? You, of course. And sometimes another pattern appears here too. I've got a few incredibly kind friends. They simply can't say no to anything. And if someone asks for help, they immediately say yes. Someone invites them to do something, even if they've got something else on, they'll try and fit it all in and say yes. But they become completely overbooked. They're always rushing, they're always late for stuff. And quite often, they end up cancelling things at the last minute because they've realised they simply don't have time in their schedule. They just don't have the capacity that they thought they had. And what started out as kindness just turns into flakiness. And it means that people actually can't rely on them. And it's not because my friends don't care. It's because they really care and they really want to do stuff. But then other people learn that when they say yes, it might not actually hold. And this really matters because a yes that you can't sustain, that's not actually that kind. And most people would prefer to hear a clear no at the beginning than be let down at a later date. But saying yes in the moment, it feels kinder, it relieves your discomfort. But if it leaves you feeling overstretched, late, resentful, or cancelling at the last minute, then nobody really feels supported by that. And it doesn't feel kind to other people. And I often say to members of my team or people that offer to help me, I need to know that you can say no to me because I will only ask you to do things if I know that you are absolutely 100% capable of saying no to me if you do not have capacity. Because when somebody knows that you can say no, your yes actually means something. I like to think of it as being the difference between being that post box that's always open, you put stuff in it, you hope it's going to be delivered. Or in my local shop, there is an in-post Amazon locker. It's basically a big metal cage with doors that will not open unless you put a certain code in. So if you've got something you want to send back to a shop, you can take it to this locker. You have to scan a QR code or put in a code. And if it is happy to accept that thing back, it will open a door and you will put it in a specific place and then it will close the door. It won't open for anybody. It will only open for people who have a clear mandate to be giving it something. And once I know I have put it in that locker, I know it is absolutely definitely going to be delivered. And I actually know some people that feel so unable to say no that they really resent anyone actually even asking them in the first place because they feel so duty bound to say yes. Now, how twisted is that? I would much prefer that people will be able to ask me things because they know that my yes will be my yes and my no will be my no, rather than me saying yes out of guilt and feeling really resentful later. Now, I don't want anyone to feel bad about this because this isn't because anybody is unkind or lazy or bad at boundaries. It's because helping people fits perfectly with our identity. So we define ourselves. like I said earlier, is the person who steps in and sorts things out. So when someone asks for help, saying no can trigger a lot of very uncomfortable feelings. Guilt. We feel guilty that we're not doing something to help other people. We fear letting them down, or we fear the consequences of what will happen if I don't step in to help. Or we worry that we're being seen as being unhelpful. And sometimes we even feel shame. The feeling that I'm not good enough if I don't help, if I don't step in. I'm not the sort of professional that I believe myself to be. And that may clash with my values of always being available and kind of being there. All this is going on subconsciously, of course, so responsibility lands before we even consciously decided whether to carry it or not. We have a choice here. If we are going to say yes and carry everything, we squeeze it in, we stay later. Just one more thing. And in the moment, that relieves the discomfort because you've helped, right? But over time, the most capable people become responsible for more and more and more. You know the phrase, ask a busy person? It's totally true, isn't it? Or you can do something different. You can still help people, but you are very, very conscious about when you do it and when you don't. And you notice and stay aware of the difference between caring for somebody, supporting somebody, and then completely taking over and taking responsibility for everything. And sometimes that means that you recognise that you care deeply, but you don't have the capacity. And instead of taking it on, you leave the responsibility where it belongs, with the other person. And yes, that feels uncomfortable because not rescuing somebody can trigger guilt. But folks, guilt is just like a warning light on the dashboard. It doesn't mean something's wrong. It means that something might be wrong. And then you can choose whether you want to listen to that story or not. Because yes, short-term guilt in the moment, but actually protecting your time and really embracing your capacity is often the only way that you'll be able to carry on doing the job well, carry on helping other people. So one simple way to start to notice when this is happening is the next time somebody asks you to do something, take a pause and ask yourself, am I just caring about this person and about the task, or am I carrying it too? And what will really help me here? Because this isn't about being selfish. It's about not letting that responsibility default to you just because somebody has asked. And it's not letting them down. That happens when you say yes, and then you realise you don't have capacity. Clear is kind, as Brené Brown often says. And automatically saying yes, just because you've been asked, means the problem has now become yours. And that is how very capable, very conscientious professionals slowly become what I call the automatic carriers of responsibility. So this week, when someone asks you for help, pause and ask yourself, am I helping here because I have capacity and I genuinely can? Or am I taking the default responsibility here only because somebody has asked and I will end up carrying it? Because caring about people doesn't mean carrying every request, and you can care deeply without carrying it all. And that really tiny moment of awareness, well, it might be the difference between supporting your colleagues well and slowly becoming responsible for far more than was ever meant to be yours. So if this episode has rung any bells for you, then do subscribe to our YouTube channel. Make sure you're notified about the next one that comes out. And if you think there's a colleague who could do with listening to it, send it to them as well. Because in our next episode, we're going to look at the third place that responsibility lands, when nobody's actually asked you, but the system expects it, when it's literally in your job, but your job is just too big.